And so let's get going with our panel on funding medical and health startups. Today, our panelists are Christine Bunt and Richard Lim. And Christine has been a founder and CEO of several life science companies and also an investor in the medical area. Rich has been a venture investor in the biopharma and healthcare space for many decades. So let's invite Christine and Richard to join us. Okay, welcome, Christine. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Right. So to get things going, in the last year with this pandemic, there suddenly seems to be tremendous interest in healthcare, health-related things, which I'm sure has improved the environment for funding startups dramatically. There's probably much more money, much easier to get funded. So why don't, Christine, why don't you start and let us know, what is the fundraising environment like for medical and health startups today?
It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the kind introduction. I think we are in a time which is really unprecedented, and what has started perhaps a little bit dark really facilitated a lot of fundraising, and many new businesses have been started. A lot of funds, and that is publicly known, have actually raised additional capital throughout the pandemic time. And I even went into the National Venture Capital Association database, and we have record data in the year 2020 throughout the pandemic. $166 billion went into startup companies, into 12,500 deals. And we are off to a good start in 2021 as well, with around $69 billion so far into about 4,000, a little less than 4,000 deals. So these are great times for entrepreneurs.
Right. And Rich, what are you seeing from your perspective in this environment today?
Sure, I'll give you some perspective of what I saw, maybe, and Christine and I may have seen, say a decade ago, where I think getting access and capital for medical and life science startups was, much more challenging. And that was reflected by the numbers of investors who had capital to deploy. I think there were also some technical challenges that were still being, managed through. But I think with the advent of sequencing, some addition of some great new modalities, cell therapies and gene editing, for example, this has really led to a convergence of not only just great technological advancement, but now capital availability. And so today, relative to a decade ago, seeing $100 million Series A rounds is almost getting commonplace, whereas Series A financings of life science deals, I'd say in a $5 to $10, $15 million, maybe a decade ago. So it's dramatic change. I would echo, Christine has described, is the fundraising environment has really improved dramatically.
Great. So there's lots of money around. We've heard that, tons of money available. But the question is, what can founders do to build value before they raise the money? So let's just, Richard, you want to continue? What do you think founders can do?
Sure. Well, I think my advice, and certainly what founders can do, is just stick to fundamentals. Now, think about technical feasibility and how to achieve that. Really thinking about unmet need and a killer app that addresses that. And I think the third and perhaps one of the most important pieces is who are you interacting with? Who's on your team, both as investors as well as on the operations side of things. This cannot be understated how important that is. So those are, I guess, three things. Don't worry about momentum. Don't worry about the market, market conditions and things. Just stick to your fundamentals.
And Christine,
I think what Rich. sorry.
Go ahead.
I think what
Go
Rich is
ahead.
saying is absolutely correct. I don't have much to add other than, try to build your network, meet with people before you even raise the capital. I think that's incredibly important. Yes, we are seeing larger rounds, right? Over $100 million. That's wonderful. But, if you really look under the hood, a lot of those management teams started earlier, working with investors. So, don't be sort of an unknown face by the time you're actually asking for the capital. I think that's something founders, and especially first-time founders, should really invest some time doing that.
So you mentioned sort of the investor side. So let's peel that away and dig a little deeper. And Christine, why don't you start off? Top three. What are the top three things that really investors are looking for when they decide to fund something?
Yeah, I think sort of the three things, the magic ingredients, haven't really changed that much. You're looking for a killer team, right? You're looking for a fantastic idea, high unmet medical need in the healthcare field, or a killer application in terms of healthcare IT. And you're looking either for good IP protection or for a very sustainable, groundbreaking competitive advantage. Those are sort of the three magic ingredients. It sounds very, very simple, but it's not. Very, very often you see a pitch where at least one of those are wrong. So it's really important to think about those things early. And if you don't have everything together, again, to your last question, right? Maybe you need to strengthen your team a little bit before you go and raise capital. It's really important to keep focus on that.
Rich, anything to add there?
First, I'll concur everything that Christine has described. Probably the one element I might add is with respect to focusing on differentiation, especially now when it's actually now at a deal frenzy level. The kinds of deals that people are seeing, we can't even breathe. And having a story that really is different, sets you apart. Look, many of us we're seeing so many deals; they're almost starting to get blur amongst each other, and so you're particularly attentive when something really catches your attention. It really is around differentiation. We found a new market opportunity. This technology is addressing something that hasn't been addressable for decades. These kinds of things that sort of catch the attention really relate to differentiation. So that's probably one thing I might add.
Right, right. And so, Rich, you mentioned the differentiation. You guys have mentioned there's lots of different money, sort of types of money out there, but what sources of money should the founders be looking for, and why should they go to those sources?
So
Rich?
maybe I'll start on this one. I think um, be thoughtful about where you're getting the money from, because I think early on, where the decision's going to have lasting consequences, having money that's attached to folks who have had some experience. Now, I want to be cautious not to tell you exactly what to do, but perhaps provide guidance on some of the pitfalls that you might run into, especially around drug discovery and development, which is where I specialize in. Having some early money where folks who have gone through what you're about to go through is incredibly useful. So what I call value-added money. I think where I am cautious is taking money from family and friends who may not have that. There's the personal risk that you are, taking money from folks like that. But I think importantly, you're not getting that sort of vector setting that you can get from folks who have been around a while doing this kind of stuff.
And so, Christine, what about, we hear a lot these days about corporate money that'll come in, maybe non-dilutive, maybe some, rights, a lot of big angel groups. Certainly there's venture capital. What are your thoughts about these different options?
So let me just add, add to the excellent points Rich made. It is very important that you think a little bit about your capital model when you start something. I mean, this might be perhaps a bit challenging for first-time founders. So again, get a network together with people who have done this before. And I agree. I am an angel investor as well, but you really need to think about how much capital you need to raise to get to revenue point or to an exit, etc. And it can be very hurtful almost, when you sort of dilute the angels out and you're going with private equity or venture capital. You just really have to think that through. To your question regarding corporate money, yes, there are a lot of big deals around, but I often hear entrepreneurs saying, "Oh, we're going to get immediately this corporate deal, etc." You can never count on that. Even if you have the hardest technology, there's so much which can go, I wouldn't say wrong, but which can change at a corporate. I was for 18 years with a large pharma, equally divided between Hoffmann-La Roche and Merck, which are terrific companies. You get a new CEO and you get a new outlook, etc. I also would caution about strategic dilution. You always give something up. This is not just non-dilutive money. It's great to have a good corporate partner, but it absolutely has to make business sense. This is not just about non-dilutive capital. It needs to drive the business or your major product or your pipeline significantly towards the goal of the company. If you're not aligned with that, you actually, a corporate deal can be very dangerous for the business.
Right. So let's get into, we've got a lot of our projects here who'll be looking to spin out companies. Any advice really sort of at the nitty gritty level of what should the founders be doing? How should they go about raising the money? Some sort of basic steps. Any one of you want to jump in?
I could start,
Pick up.
certainly, and I'll pick up from something that Christine had mentioned already at the outset, and it relates to the network. I hate to say this too, but and who does matter because it links you to people who could help. I mean, this is like any other business. This is not unique to life sciences and medical. Understanding how the market works, getting to the right vendors, the right syndicate partners, who does matter. So getting out there and developing those relationships is crucial. I will say that the Deshpande Center, and it's not meant to be an advertisement for a Deshpande Center, has been a wonderful nexus point of bringing in outside folks who have helped companies, and they built, many of the people here built companies with their own hands. This has been a wonderful, sort of nexus point. And I encourage those, soon to be founders or current founders to tap the network at Deshpande Center. Everyone plays the Kevin Bacon game. I think it only takes a couple of steps if you go through Deshpande to get to people who can really truly help you out on a long-term basis.
And Christine, any
I
thoughts on
concur with that. Yeah, I concur with that. Start with the Deshpande Center, but go even further. MIT is a fantastic place for networking. We have so many entrepreneurial professors as well, or students, right? Alumni. So you have a fantastic place to start with, which perhaps other founders won't have. So really make use of that. Another important aspect, which I see at the foundation stage of a company, often there are different founders coming together and perhaps even beyond MIT, right? So you have Harvard involved, maybe Stanford. Make sure it's very clear where the IP is coming from, if IP is involved at that stage, and sort that out. That's a risk perhaps investors are looking at. There has to be an agreement. So that's value added prior to actually get started with a larger capital raise. Seed funding, that's perhaps okay. The other aspect is, if there are a couple of founders involved, there has to be agreement on the founder shares. Not an easy thing to do, but perhaps a good subject to entertain early on.
Yeah, let me just dig into that a little more, because one of the questions that, gosh, we've been asked many, many times by founding teams is, how should they divide the equity, and does it matter? So we'd love, your experience, your thoughts. What advice would you give them? And Rich, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I mean, it is case by case, and it is a sensitive subject. So many cases I see folks they just take the denominator and equally cut, the founder shares, for example. So if two founders is 50-50, that, might work for many, many folks, and that might make sense. But I do think you have to think hard about contributions of IP, be honest with each other with, where, how much effort, each are going to expend. If you know that you're already spread thin, the expectation of you to take, the same share as somebody else who is putting their life work and really working their tail off over the next few years, I think you have to be very thoughtful about that, but put it in writing. I have seen, and it never surprises me now these days, to put it in writing, because any post facto sort of changes in agreements or expectations stuff could lead to a really nasty discussion. So put it in writing.
Christine?
I totally agree. This is a very sensitive subject, and it's an art and not a science. I agree with everything Richard has said. Sometimes there it actually helps to have an experienced investor, to have those informal discussions before you even raise the round. They sometimes can help and facilitate a good discussion, and that's needed. Or a couple of very good startup attorneys. They're very well rehearsed in those subjects as well. And I totally agree. Don't fight over this. Agree early. It may need a few rounds of discussion and document it. It's very, very important.
Yeah, and I will also just add to the people watching, is certainly make sure that all the equity vests. It's not just handed out. It takes 4 years before it vests,
Very true.
in case people leave the company. We see many situations where it's 2 years in, some people leave, and then they find it's hard to get back all that equity. So looking at, you've seen a lot of startups, seen a lot of founders. Common mistakes that you've seen that have been made by founders. And Christine, do you want to continue on that one? You've been on both sides of it.
Yeah. One sort of, I wouldn't call it necessarily a mistake, but one issue perhaps, which I've seen popping up, is that focus on non-dilutive funding right away. And that sensitivity towards dilution from equity investors, I think that can actually hurt the business. If you do collaborations too early, your economics will be very, very different. I would rather think about creating value, really building your product or your service of your company, and bring it to a critical point. And you need some equity financing for that. So I would not be too oversensitive to dilution. And in full disclosure, with my first company I did out of MIT, and I was at the Spande Center project, I was very sensitive about dilution at the beginning with the first round, and I learned my lesson. But it's really important to consider a good capital model to a value inflection point for your business.
Yeah, and Rich, mistakes that you've seen founders make?
I have seen mistakes in really disturbing what might be alignment of interest. I think we're all trying to search for that, and even some of my views about what a VC should do might be counters as to what other VCs might say. But from the founder's perspective, to try to say for example, in terms of governance, to control everything with regards to the trajectory of the company. This is my company. I want to have last say about things. I encourage temperament around that. And likewise on the VC side, I really don't espouse, documents that give total control to the VC either. This is a very, early stage. We're both in it together. Anything that allows for that alignment of interest, I encourage founders to seek that out.
Great. So we're running about 4 or 5 minutes ahead of schedule. We'd normally end the panel now, so I think we've got time for another few minutes of discussion. So we were talking about mistakes. So let me ask both of you. So what are mistakes that you've made and that you wish you'd known about before either starting or investing in companies? So, Christine, any mistakes, or were you perfectly flawless?
Of course, you need to make a few mistakes and learn from it, right? So one of the interesting mistakes, I remember a breakfast at Henrietta's table with Jonathan Fleming, and he wouldn't mind me giving this as an example, where I delivered a pitch for a capital round. I forgot even which company it was, and he said, stop right here. I said, yes, is something wrong? I want to really learn about you first as a person, rather than, your pitch and your business model. So it comes back to what I said earlier. We as investors, I'm switching my head now, I'm going from entrepreneur to investor. We want to know about the people, what you can do, because we need to project into the future, do reserves of capital, etc. Is this the team? Is that the person who can take a concept and build a product, in a couple of years down the road? So I really underestimated, and perhaps coming from pharma, which is still a fairly conservative environment, how important it is to get to know people and let investors know about your personality and how you approach problems, etc. So that was one of the mistakes I made early on.
And Rich, I know you've never made any mistakes.
I made tons of them, and that's the only reason I think why we are where we are is because you hopefully have learned from some of those mistakes. I think probably the one principle that I continue to monitor for myself is if you see something that's wrong, whether it be a factual item and or your intuition is suggesting something is wrong, address it. Try to do it obviously in a productive, constructive manner. And I really emphasize that. I just see so many egos, get involved, but shoveling it out to the future, you're going to pay for it later. So if you see a problem, be thoughtful enough, and don't worry about deference or hurting feelings and stuff. Again, if you do it thoughtfully, the other side should find it, highly enlightening that you brought it up, because I think both parties would, founders and investors would really suffer from that. So again, be honest with things that strike you as being problematic right up front.
Right. Well, it's been a great panel. I know we could go on for quite a long time having this conversation. And I want to thank both of you for spending the time with us today. And I'm sure people have specific questions, they will reach out to you. But Christine, Rich, thank you very, very much. And thank you also for all the time you spend, as catalysts, mentors at the Deshpande Center, because you've both been involved with us for quite a long time. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. It's been an immense pleasure. It's an immense pleasure.